There were numerous deaths at the Berlin Wall, which stood as a barrier between West Berlin and East Germany from the 13th of August 1961 until the 9th of November 1989. Before the rise of the Berlin Wall in 1961, 3.5 million East Germans circumvented Eastern Bloc emigration restrictions, many by crossing over the border from East Berlin into West Berlin, from where they could then travel to West Germany and other Western European countries. Between 1961 and 1989, the wall prevented almost all such emigration. The state-funded Center for Contemporary History in Potsdam has given the official figure of 138 deaths, including people attempting to escape, border guards, and innocent parties. However, researchers at the Checkpoint Charlie Museum and some others had estimated the death toll to be significantly higher. The escape attempts claimed the lives of a wide variety of people, from a child as young as 1 to an 80-year-old woman, and many died because of the accidental or illegal actions of the guards. In numerous legal cases throughout the 1990s, several border guards, along with political officials responsible for the defense policies, were found guilty of manslaughter and served probation or were jailed for the role in the Berlin Wall deaths. Historical background. After World War II, Berlin had been divided into 4 sectors controlled by the Allies: the US, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. The sector borders inside the city could in general be used freely for passage out of the German Democratic Republic, even after the border between the Federal Republic of Germany and the GDR had been continually closed off. Starting in 1952, the outer border of West Berlin, which was also the border between West Berlin and the GDR, had also been closed down in 1952. During the night of 12 to the 13th of August 1961, the National People's Army, the German Border Police, the Volkspolizei and the combat groups of the working class locked down all passages between the Soviet sector and the 3 West sectors. Construction of border protection facilities began. During the first years, border fortifications inside the city mostly consisted of brick walls with a top made of barbed wire. Clay bricks and concrete slabs were used for construction. Further obstacles of barbed wire and upstate walls delimited the east, and at some places, like Bernauer Strasse, bricked-up buildings formed the boundary line. The buildings were situated on East Berlin territory, whereas the pavement in front of the houses belonged to West Berlin. In many places, safety installations of West Berlin's outer ring consisted of metal fences and barbed wire barriers. Technologically advanced upgrading took place later on, and only in 1975 L-shaped concrete segments that were known from the fall of the wall were added. Identifying the death toll. Identifying deaths specifically attributable to the Berlin Wall is not straightforward. Although East Germans were aware of deaths on the wall from West German media broadcasts which they were able to receive, reliable information was closely held by the East German authorities. A number of different West German institutions kept their own records. These included the West Berlin Police, the Central Registry of State Judicial Administration in Salzgitter, and the Arbeitsgruppe. The 13th of August, a West Berlin Association. Within the jurisdiction of the West Berlin Police, the State Security Department was responsible for the registration of known incidents. The records distinguish between individuals who died at the outer border of West Berlin, unclear incidents, and border guards who were shot. The Central Registry of State Judicial Administrations in Salzgitter was also given a mandate to collect evidence of actual or attempted murder in the GDR. GDR. In 1991, it published the Salzgitter Report with the names of 78 victims. However, since the registration agency had no access to the GDR archives, the data was regarded as incomplete. Both agencies mainly listed incidents that could have been observed from West Berlin or had been reported by fugitives or border patrols who left the GDR after the fall of the wall. Criminal investigations into border killings were launched by the Investigating Agency for Governmental and Party Crimes and the Berlin Public Prosecutor's Office. Each of these institutions used different criteria to count deaths. In 2000, the ZDRV compared data from the Central Registration Office in Salzgitter with findings in GDR archives and made a total of 122 cases of targeted killing by GDR state organs at the border to West Berlin. This list was a pre-inquiry for the prosecution departments of Berlin and Neuruppin, which in turn gave attention to legal processing. The Salzgitter registry recorded incidents in which suspicion of a criminal act was justified, while the Arbeitsgruppe the 13th of August, which also manages the house at Checkpoint Charlie and is run by the artist Alexandra Hildebrand, widow of the founder Rainer Hildebrand, counted all victims who died in connection with flight and/or the border regime, including deaths by accidents or drowning, or deaths of border soldiers and policemen in suicides or firearms accidents. This gave them the figure of 235 deaths compared to the significantly lower number of 78 according to the Salzgitter registry. The results, which are described as temporary by the working group, are regularly presented at press conferences on the 13th of August. The list is consistently revised, with new cases being included and old ones abandoned. The Checkpoint Charlie Museum gives the number at 245 deaths, though this includes suicides by border guards and bodies found in the water even when there was no obvious link to them being an escapee. They also state that the first person to die at the wall was in fact an East German officer who committed suicide. In 2005, the Gedenkstadt Berliner Mauer established a research project to definitively establish the number and identities of the individuals who died at the Berlin Wall between 1961 and 1989 and to document the lives and deaths through historical and biographical research. The project was funded by the Federal Agency for Civic Education, Deutschlandradio, and the Federal Commissioner of Culture and Media. The results were published on the website www.Chronik der Mauer, when in a book titled Todesopfer in der Berliner Mauer. The project outlines the victims' biographies, the causes of death and the sources that were used. At the time, no reliable or official information was available about the number of fatalities at the wall. The project found that 136 people had died, using the criteria of either an attempted escape or a temporal and spatial link between the death and the border regime. Not all had died immediately. One fatality occurred years later, and not all were caused by acts of violence. After reviewing 575 deaths, the project team found that at least 138 people died in shootings, were killed in accidents or committed suicide after failing to cross the wall. Criteria. Every investigation committee had its own criteria of which cases could be counted as wall victims. The ZDRV investigations focused on a working legal guilt, while the ZZF and the Arbeitsgemeinschaft 13. August developed their own criteria that went beyond purely legal guilt. The ZZF criteria required the victim to have a background for the attempted escape or to have both a temporal and a spatial connection to the border regime. 5 groups were developed from the examined cases: fugitives shot and killed or fatally injured by East German security forces while trying to cross the wall; fugitives who died while attempting to cross the wall, or who committed suicide when their attempt failed, or who suffered fatal injuries in the course of their attempt; people from East and West who were shot and killed or fatally injured by East German security forces; people from East and West who died or were fatally injured as a result of the actions or inaction of the East German security forces; members of the East German border troops who were killed or suffered fatal injuries while on duty. The definition coined by the Arbeitsgruppe 13. August reaches further. It includes border guards that committed suicide and cold cases involving bodies found in boundary waters. However, a thorough investigation of all natural cases of death has not been completed yet. 1/3 of all files from the police of transport are gone. Entire annual reports of the 1970s are missing. Analyzing the daily records of border guards and to examine activities in areas that had been under surveillance might have presented an alternative, but could not be realized because of financial issues. Another 16 cases of drowning could not definitively be connected to the wall. Many other travelers from East and West Germany and Czechoslovakia died immediately before, during, or after passing through checkpoints in Berlin, with a published figure of 251 deaths. Most were the result of cardiac arrest. Controversy about the number of casualties. The exact number of casualties is unknown. There are different numbers that each derive from different investigations that use different definitions of what a victim in this case should be. Therefore, the numbers are hardly comparable. On top of that, some results are published infrequently or investigations were ceased with a provisional number. There is also a publicly held controversy between two groups regarding the number of victims. The opponents are the Arbeitsgemeinschaft 13. August and the ZZF. The former's numbers are higher, as they include, according to ZZF's Hans-Hermann Hertel, victims with an unclear or unsure connection to the border regime. After the ZZF published its interim results in August 2006, Alexandra Hildebrandt of the Arbeitsgemeinschaft has accused them of withholding numbers to invoke a more positive picture of East Germany. She argues that the ZZF project was funded by a coalition of social democrats and leftists. In 2008, the Arbeitsgemeinschaft claimed that since 1961-222 people had died because of the Berlin Wall. Hertel doubted these numbers, as they evidently included some survivors. As of 2006, 36 survivors were listed as deceased because of the wall, and some victims were mentioned more than once. Because of these shortcomings, he assessed the list as an extensive record of suspected cases that failed to set up a scientifically verifiable standard. Berlin's governing mayor Klaus Wowereit commented on the dispute with the words, "Every single dead was one too many." Quote, in 2009, Hildebrandt reported of 245 dead caused by the wall. According to her research, the first wall victim was a suicidal GDR officer and not Ida Siegmann, as Hildebrandt also included border guards that committed suicide and cold cases of bodies found in boundary waters in her list. Another difference in Hertel's and Hildebrandt's list can be explained by the fact that Hertel had additional access to incomplete files from transport police. Therefore, their accounts vary in regard to the people that died of natural causes during border controls. Hertel argues with a total of 251 of such cases, while Hildebrandt only compiled 38 of these cases. Information on the dead can be found mainly in the administrative and military archives of West and East Germany. However, the records of Stasi, which were administered by the Stasi Federal Commission, information are not completely accessible. Some parts, especially from the later years, were destroyed when the ministry was disbanded. Some are not yet sifted. Additionally, due to the Stasi records law, many records can only be looked at in the form of anonymized excerpts. An amendment from 2007 allows direct access to research projects, provided certain conditions are met. The East German border troop records are kept at the Bundeswehrarchive, as the border troops were part of the East German National People Army. According to Hertel, when border troop Stasi and the records from Western authorities are evaluated, one has to take into account the values, interests and constraints of the record-keeping authorities and, by extension, of the respective power relations. The families of the victims can be another source, but were often fed with false information and therefore can only seldom answer questions regarding the events themselves. First and last deaths. When Berlin was a divided city, the Berlin Wall ran along Bernauer Straße. The street itself belonged to the French sector of West Berlin, and the East German authorities declared that the windows and doors that led out onto Bernauer Straße should be bricked up. In the early morning of the 22nd of August 1961, Ida C. Ekman was the first of 98 people to die while attempting to escape. She was living on the fourth floor of number 48, threw bedding and some possessions down onto the street, and jumped out of the window of her apartment. She fell on the sidewalk and was severely injured, dying shortly afterwards on her way to the Lazarus Hospital. On the 8th of March 1989, Winfried Freudenberg became the last person to die in an attempt to escape from East Germany to West Berlin across the Berlin Wall by falling from his balloon. Causes and periods of deaths. The Berlin Wall, like the much longer inner German border between East and West Germany, was designed with two purposes in mind: to obstruct would-be border crosses and to enable border guards to detect and stop illegal border crossings. In its final form, the 156 km wall consisted of inner and outer concrete walls separated by a death strip, some 15 meters to 150 meters wide. It was guarded by around 11,500 Grenztruppen, the border troops of the German Democratic Republic, who were authorized to use any means necessary, including firearms, to prevent border breach. The shooting orders, or Schießbefehl, issued to the border guards instructed that people attempting to cross the wall were criminals, and that the use of deadly force was required to deal with them. Do not hesitate to use your firearm, not even when the border is breached in the company of women and children, which is a tactic that traitors have often used. Some guards have since claimed that the motto at the time was, "A dead refugee is better than an escaped one." At first, wounded or shot refugees were left out in the open until they were removed, so that people from West Berlin and the Western press could see them as well. After the reactions to the public death of Peter Fechter, border guards were ordered to move any casualties out of West Berlin's field of view. Negative reporting was sought to be prevented. Because of this, border guards often pulled people down into the car moat that was part of the whole border security system. In some cases, the removal of the body was done only after nightfall. The principal cause of death was shooting. Of the 138 fatalities, 97 were shot dead, not only escapees but also individuals on either side who were not attempting to escape, and East German border guards killed on duty. 98 of the fatalities were attempted border crosses, of which all but one were East Germans. 67 of them were killed in shootings. Another 30 people died as a result of shootings or fatal accidents sustained while in the vicinity of the wall but not trying to cross it. 8 East German border soldiers were killed on duty by escapees, escape helpers, fellow soldiers, or the West Berlin police. 3 people committed suicide after escape attempts fail. About half of those who lost their lives on the wall were killed in the first 5 years after it was originally installed. Death rates fell from then on, and took a particularly dramatic downturn after 1976. Nearly 86% of the wall's victims, 119 people, died between 1961 and 1975. Between 1976 and 1989, only 19 died. Several factors account for this reduction. The wall became even more impregnable owing to technical improvements carried out in the mid-1970s, and more restrictions were put on the area adjoining the wall, making it more difficult to reach in the first place. The signing of the Helsinki Accords in 1975 led to new opportunities to cross the border legally, resulting in a rise in emigration applications and a corresponding fall in escape attempts. Deaths by year, locations, demographics and motivations of the victims. Around 2/3 of the victims were killed in inner Berlin, accounting for 92 of the 138. Berlin, Mitte and Treptow were the inner-city districts with the most fatalities. Nearly half of the 64 escapees who died on the sector border lost their lives in those 2 districts. The remaining third died on the city's outskirts, where the suburbs of West Berlin intersected with towns and villages in East Germany. Several victims, including most of the children, drowned in the Spree of the Havel. Most of those who died were young men aged between 16 and 30. Married men accounted for 20% of the deaths, while only 8 were women. 9 children younger than 16 years old died, whereas 93 victims were aged between 21 and 30. The overwhelming majority came from East Berlin and the surrounding area. The motives for escaping evolved over time. Those who fled in the years shortly after the wall was built had experienced the formerly open border firsthand and often had relatives in the West, or had traveled there. By contrast, later escapees had grown up with the closed border, desired greater freedom and were dissatisfied with conditions in East Germany. Their attempts to escape were often triggered by specific events such as a wish to avoid conscription, repression by the authorities of the refusal of a request to emigrate. Many escapees had previously clashed with the state authorities and had been imprisoned for political offenses, often related to earlier unsuccessful escape attempts. Deaths by population demographic. East German responses to deaths. The use of lethal force on the Berlin Wall was an integral part of the East German state's policy towards its border system. Nonetheless, the East German government was well aware that border killings had undesirable consequences. The West German, US, British and French authorities protested killings when they occurred, and the international reputation of East Germany was damaged as a result. It also undermined the East German government's support at home. The Stasi, East Germany's secret police, adopted a policy of concealing killings as much as possible. In the case of the November 1986 shooting of Michael Bittner at the Wall, a Stasi report commented, "The political sensitivity of the state border to Berlin made it necessary to conceal the incident. Rumors about the incident had to be prevented from circulating, with information passing to West Berlin of the FRG. The Stasi took charge of corpse cases and those injured while trying to cross the border, who were transported to hospitals run by the Stasi, the police, where they would recuperate before being transferred to Stasi prisons. The Stasi also took sole responsibility for the disposal of the dead and the possessions. Bodies were not returned to relatives but were cremated, usually at the crematorium at Baumschulenweg. Occasionally the cost of the cremations was covered by the victims themselves using money taken from the pockets. Stasi officers posing as policemen would inform the relatives, though not before trying to obtain valuable pieces of information on the border violation. Deaths would be stated as being due to a border provocation of his own causing, a fatal accident of his own causing, or drowning in a border waterway. Every border death was investigated in detail to identify how the attempt had been made, whether there were any vulnerabilities in the border system that needed to be remedied, and whether anyone else had been involved. If necessary, the family, relatives, friends, colleagues and neighbors were put under surveillance. The reports produced following such cases were sent to the relevant member of the East German Politburo for consideration. The one exception to the general rule of concealment and obfuscation was that of border guards who died on duty. Most were killed either deliberately or accidentally by escapees or escape helpers. The dead guards were hailed by East German government propaganda as heroes, but West German public opinion was divided about the morality of killing border guards. Some took the view that escapees were entitled to use force in the course of crossing the border, but others saw the guard's life as taking priority over an escapee's freedom. In those cases they did not manage to conceal, however. The GDR's media was subject to stringent controls by the Stasi as well as the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, using Ostdeutschland, the GDR's second largest daily newspaper, as the central organ. Through its own television station, the GDR government controlled the content shown in television broadcasting as well. The GDR border troops' actions were being portrayed as legitimate border defense, and the people who were killed while trying to escape were defamed, both in official statements as well as in reports of the state-controlled media. In 1962, East German journalist Karl Eduard von Schnitzler commented on the death of Peter Fechter in the television program Der Schwarze Kanal. The life of every single one of our brave boys in uniform is worth more than the life of a lawbreaker to us. Staying away from the border, you can save yourself blood, tears and screams, said newspaper. Ostdeutschland claimed Fechter was driven into suicide by front city bandits, as well as accusing him of being homosexual. In similar fashion, Gunter Liffen was falsely depicted as being a homosexual, a prostitute as well as a criminal. In 1966, the Berliner Zeitung depicted Eduard Wroblewski as antisocial and being wanted as a foreign legionnaire for serious crimes in the district of Halle. These cases were exemplary of representatives of the press constructing false allegations in order to defame killed escapees.